All right. This one is called Meet Again by Jay Wilburn. Charlie made sure to get to the beach that fateful night extra early. He could still meet her and everything could work out fine. But it took a bit more effort to win her over if he missed this magic moment. Something about that restaurant bar, the quiet music, the wind off the water, the lights strung out above them, and probably who they were at that exact moment made all the difference. He was always tempted to try to meet her sooner each time, but the age difference made the gamble quite awkward. The relationship with her father was never quite the same if he stepped into her life before this night. Then there she was. Laura stood right before him, just like the first time he ever saw her in this moment. It never got old for him, never. So he picked this moment, walked up to her on the hard sands under those lights, and introduced himself. He was quite practiced at this and rarely messed it up anymore. All the years he waited for her paid off again. This was really where life began. This was really where, let's say, his life began. They finished college, got engaged, were married at the same church as the first time. Once he set up for a destination wedding, it was a logistical nightmare. They still cherish those memories. Let's say that time around. But it was hard on some of the people they loved. Having all their friends and family there meant so much more. Lara loved the wedding each time, but when they got older, they would agree that the money wasn't worth it. They always married young, though. So he had to go along with the wishes of her younger self at the time. He needed to give her time as they grew together. He always had more growth and maturing to do himself even now. All right. This time around, Charlie delayed getting diagnosed. He knew what it would mean, but she had missed out on some of her dream trips in the past, and he wanted her to have one round where it all came true. He knew she wouldn't remember it all in the long run like he could, and what followed might sour those memories, but he still felt it was worth it at least once. They took the whirlwind tour. Then he waited long enough that the two events wouldn't be linked in her mind. Once they found the problem on his next checkup, the recovery was much harder on his body. He survived and endured all that pain and treatments with her by his side. That brought him a few more years in their old age, but he knew what was coming. They could never fix that part. This time she got there in time to say goodbye. He whispered in her ear, "We'll meet again under those magic lights," and he meant it just like every other time. Charlie woke easy in the take-in area. That needs to be hyphenated. In the take-in area, and gripped the familiar arms of his leather chair. Cass and Gale sat across from him at the desk. Cass and Gale still had his hat and that brown suit, but his beard had been cut down to the mustache curled at the ends. They were in some sort of dark alcove off the factory floor. Charlie turned in his seat and saw the massive factory outside the open back wall and heard the giant machines working away. Did you graduate to your own space? Charlie asked. Cassengale sighed and said, No, we had a huge leak, oil everywhere. It's taking forever to clean up. Still don't get exactly what all those machines do, Cassengale. It's the machinery of the universe, just as hard to explain as every other time. Well, Charlie turned forward. Let's get this done, shall we? Charlie, Charlie, Charlie. What's on your mind, Cassengale? I suppose asking you what you want to do with your next life is just a formality as always. Charlie smiled. Like the machinery of the universe, it must keep going. Almost poetic, Charlie. You do know that many of the things you wish to fix about your life are adjusted in the next one. You should choose to move on. Charlie crossed his leg, stared at Cassengale's mustache, and waited. You're not even going to consider it. Charlie shrugged. There is nothing wrong with the life I have. Had, Cassengale said. Charlie smiled. And will have again. Of course, you can go back and repeat the same life. There is that flaw, though. You're not supposed to remember, not as completely as you do. The human mind is not supposed to recall so many versions of the same life. It's the same flaw that kills you every time and leaves her a widow for so many years. How long does she go without me? You know I can't answer that, Charlie. Then you need to stop bringing it up. What you call a flaw is all I ever want. So go through the motions, fill out the paperwork, because I'm going round again. Cassengale relented, as he always did. Then Charlie stepped into the light to be born again. Let me say reborn. To be reborn again. I know that's it's a redundancy, but I think it works for this story. Charlie usually started to remember his past lives between 4 and 6 years old. During those years, he'd say and do things that usually got him sent to a child therapist. As the memories really started to fall into place, he remembered enough to stop talking. No more strange predictions, no more cryptic messages beyond his ears, no more walking around the house searching for a ghost named Laura. He just got better, played it cool, and things went back to normal. Typically, he started doing much better in school. He'd lived his life hundreds of times, so elementary math and reading was a breeze. Sometimes he let himself get placed into the smart classes. Other times he held back because ultimately school was boring for him now. He just started reading more books in his spare time. The advanced classes were more work for no real reward in his view. He had to hide the advanced books he picked up from the library, pretending they were for his dad. Let's say, when he checked them out or dropped them off. Okay. This time, Charlie arranged to meet Laura early. It wasn't easy because he was in the middle school when she was still in elementary. Let's put a comma there. And they were only in high school 1 year together. So Charlie got into theater. Charlie decided to get into theater classes this time around. He made sure he got a, let's say, speaking part. Made sure he got a speaking part in the one acts, and he met her as a freshman in high school. This was a big gamble, but he wanted more time with her. They talked but didn't really try to strike anything up. He stayed in touch with her, not as easy before email and cell phones were as common. He had to hear about her old boyfriends in real time. He feared being put into the friend zone, but only a little. They were always meant to be. He dated a little this time around too. He never let himself get close. In a few past lives, girls started falling for him, and he reached a point he had to really break their hearts. They were never going to be the one for him. Let's say we fix this. It scared him to think they could be. He could try out a life with one of them. Laura would go on to make someone else happy. She would have children with them. They might both find wonderful lives apart, but it wouldn't be Laura. It wouldn't be right. Children were tricky. Some lifetimes they had them and others they didn't. Sometimes they had the same names as previous lives, but they were different kids. Sometimes girls and sometimes boys. Charlie told himself they went on to have their own lives and their own afters. Cass and Gale at the end of each life hinted to as much without really saying so. He loved their children, whoever they turned out to be, let's say each time. He always tried hard to be a better father, but it seemed there were never enough lifetimes to perfect that. This time, under the lights on the sand, it was like a reunion. Charlie feared she might not choose to be with him, since he was already in a different place in her life, but things worked out like they were meant to. They had their church, let's say their church wedding, their kids, and their life together. Charlie got his diagnosis earlier. They were able to help him live longer, a little longer anyway. But they both had, okay, hold on. But they both had to live with it longer. Laura did too. No, let's say Laura too. He saw more age on her by the time he passed. Charlie whispered in her ear, "I love our life together. I would choose no other." Cass and Gale's desk was back in the middle of the factory floor. They must have got that oil spill cleaned up. Cass and Gale had his beard again. Let's say had his full beard. All right, he held up Charlie's folder and said, "I have everything in place. I can't fill it out until you get here each time. If you changed your mind, just let me know, Charlie. I'm ready to start again. I figured you would be." Charlie didn't date much this time around. He started playing around with making short films. He got into podcasting way ahead of everybody else. He considered maybe stealing ideas for books or songs before the people could write them, but he never could bring himself to do that to someone. His accurate predictions on his podcast made him quite popular, and he earned a good living early on with the ad revenue. He wasn't late to the beach that night. Finally, they were together again. No, that's not the way to say that. He was early to the beach that night. Finally, they were together again. Each time was like taking a first breath. A couple weeks later, he suggested they sneak off for a ski trip. He remembered a friend telling him the story of being snowed in with his then girlfriend. Okay, so we'll say then Charlie, and I'll spell it right, Charlie and Laura got snowed in just like he knew they would. As he hoped, they spent a lot of time together in that cabin, and it became one of their cherished memories. Let's say this time. He decided he would include the ski trip again next time around. Poor Cassangale. That guy so wanted to move Charlie on to a new life, but he was not through with this one. Not by a long shot. He never grew tired of Laura. Cassangale had her folder ready as... I changed the name here. Had her folder ready as Laura lifted her head. From her standpoint... Well, let me see if I can spell that right. From her standpoint, Charlie had been dead for over 20 years. She hadn't remarried. She never did. Cassangale, she said, as she remembered this place and all her past lives. Say this was when they were supposed to remember. And not before. He took me skiing this time. That was different. It was. Let's say Cassangale. Cassangale agreed. All right. Does he remember? It always seems like he knows things before they happen. Does he remember? Cassangale swallowed and said, "Some people get glimpses. They have a funny feeling that only has a word for it." No. Put a comma this time, that'll work. All right. That funny feeling that only has a word for it in French. She laughed. He smiled. "No one is supposed to remember, though." "It's always like the first time," Laura said. "If you choose to repeat your last life, it always is." She smiled wider. "I think I'm going to go again. I know Charlie always goes again, and he would miss me if I wasn't there to meet him." "As you wish." Cassangale started the paperwork. She didn't remember the spot at the Peach. She didn't remember any of it. But those lights, the music, the ocean air, and her mood drew her to the spot with a power beyond memory. This was a magic place. Then some guy came up to talk to her. There was always some guy ready to butt in at any moment. She hoped he was at least nice. Let's say she hoped he could take a polite no for an answer. She never got around to the no. Let's say to saying the no. All right, first of all, we'll fix that. She never got around to saying the no. It was on the tip of her tongue a few times. But it felt like he was part of the magic now. Sending him away would break the moment. So she kept him there out of necessity. Up to that point in her life, she felt like there were so few magic moments, and fewer by the year. Laura had no idea what was to come. She had no intention of falling in love with him that night. Years later, she would pretend she had, because she knew Charlie had fallen instantly the eternal romantic he was. There was always something later that won her. Not a moment, but a series of them. The skiing trip. How he treated others. The way he knew. Got the sun about to come in on a... Okay, what angle is that sunlight coming in now? Sorry. Okay, I guess it's through the blinds there. Alright, the skiing trip. How he treated others. The way he knew someone needed to be saved. And did it. The way he never grew tired of routines that involved her. It was always something. He seemed to feel the magic too, and treated it and her with respect. She was glad she met Charlie that day, and she had no idea what their lives would hold together. All right.